Mahim, Sintamana Ke Kanema, Nicole Anna, Round Valley Ke Anna. My name is Nicole Whipple. I'm a member of the Round Valley Indian Tribes and also a water protector and policy advocate with Save California Salmon. Thank you all for joining us today to discuss our FERC commenting period. And just to do a little housekeeping, you can put in your questions in the chat. We don't have a live commenting portion, but you can put questions in the chat and we will respond. Um, to start us off, I'd like to provide some announcements. You can provide questions in the Q&A section. Thanks. So aside from tonight's evening Zoom meeting, we will be hosting a few other events. This Friday, Friends of the Eel River, Save California Salmon, and Roar will be hosting an in-person event. A commenting workshop and dinner, food and entertainment will be provided at Synapsis 675 Union Street in Eureka. That will be at 6 o'clock. Next Tuesday, on the 18th from 5 to 7, the Sierra Club Redwood Chapter and California Trout will be having an in-person meeting in Ukiah. To register, we'll put that in the link, and you will get the address there in Ukiah. Charlie, do you know by chance the actual address? I have it in my link. Sorry about that. I'll look that up here shortly. And then next Friday, Friends of the Eel River, Save California Salmon, and Roar will be hosting another in-person event with dinner and music provided by Seventh Generation Rise. Side dishes are welcome and desserts. We will have kids activities and be taking input on needed youth and community activities. This will be at the Matil Community Center, 59 Russ Lane in Redway. On other topics, Save California Salmon is also hosting community dinners and listening sessions for the tribal youth and families to talk about education and youth programming and the needs for our youth. In Hoopa, the listening session will be on Wednesday, November 13th, 2025 at 5:30 p.m. at the Hoopa Valley High School cafeteria. In Orleans, the listening session will be held on Monday, November 18th at 5:30 at the Orleans Elementary School cafeteria. And an online session will be held Thursday, November 20th at 5 o'clock via Zoom. We are also hiring an education and community support director and staff attorney and legal coordinator. Applications are due November 15th. More information is on our website at californiasalmon.org under the employment tab. And we encourage everybody to check out the new K through 12 Native American curriculum and related trainings model that can be found at the Native American Studies Model Curriculum website, HCO, Humboldt County Office of Education.org/Native American Studies Model Curriculum. Several lessons from Save California Salmon are included in the K through 12 Native American curriculum model. So just to share a little bit about why we're here. Again, I'm from Round Valley, and this process is extremely important and very dear to my heart, as the Potter Valley project currently sits on a Yuki site, and Round Valley is, the only tribe that is where the Yuki tribe is federally recognized. And this site is very important to us. It's very critical for dam removal to happen right now to restore the cultural history of our tribal people, of all of our tribes in the Eel River watershed. I find it very important for us to restore the cultural resources, as well as asking FERC to take the dams down now and as quickly as possible. With that being said, I'm going to hand this over to Alicia Heyman, and she will get started talking about the FERC commenting process.
Thank you so much, Nicole. So I'm going to start off actually by just orienting everyone a little bit with the Eel River and the Potter Valley project. I work for Friends of the Eel River. We're a 30-year-old environmental nonprofit working for the recovery of the wild and scenic Eel River, its fisheries and communities. And we were founded for this very purpose, to see the Eel River dams removed. And to return the salmon to the hundreds of miles of really excellent habitat in the upper basin. So this is a super exciting time for us. The Eel River is the third largest watershed entirely in California, and it's known for its historic abundance of fisheries. The eel is also home to a really wide diversity of native people that includes Wiyot, Wailaki, Yuki, Pomo, and many, many others. And despite the horrible violence and systemic destruction of cultures, many of those native people still call the eel home and are working hard to revitalize the watershed and their way of life. And they are leading some of the most important restoration projects on the river, including dam removal. So those abundant salmon and steelhead runs that we used to have in the eel, you used to see about 1 million fish return to freshwater each year. Unfortunately, today those numbers, of course, are far lower, about 5% of historic abundance. But because groups like Friends of the Eel were focused on the root causes of this decline, we are looking at dam removal because it is the single most important restoration action we can take to advance fisheries recovery in the Eel River. Um, so where is the Potter Valley Project? What is it? This map here shows the upper part of the Eel River watershed, which confusingly for those of us who are in the northern part of the watershed, it's down below us in the south. The Potter Valley Project is basically due east of Willits, and it's on the headwaters of the main stem of the Eel River. It includes two dams called Cape Horn and Scott, a diversion tunnel that sends water from the Eel into the Russian River, and a now defunct powerhouse that sits on the Russian River side of this project. So as you travel upstream on the main stem Eel, the first dam you come to is Cape Horn. It was completed in 1908 and has a reservoir that's mostly filled with sediment now. There is a fish ladder there, but it needs extensive upgrades and causes a lot of harm to native fish. Just upstream from Cape Horn Dam is where that diversion tunnel is. And for the last several years, it's been sending about 30 to 40,000 acre-feet of water annually from the Eel to the Russian River. It used to be a lot more, so we're glad that the quantity of the water has been reduced. But there is still some problems with the seasonality of the diversion. And the plan is to address those problems with the new diversion that will come about with dam removal. Um, if you want to hear more about that, there are lots of other resources, and I think Charlie will probably talk a little bit about the new diversion infrastructure called the New Eel Russian Facility, or NERF. So about 12 miles upstream of that is Scott Dam. And Scott Dam was built in 1922, and it creates the Lake Pillsbury Reservoir. Um, the original storage capacity of the reservoir was much larger than it currently is, and that is due in large part to this reservoir also filling up with sediment, just like the reservoir behind Cape Horn Dam. So the main fact driving PG&E's interest in dam removal is that the project has long been a money loser. And that's really important to keep in mind, especially when we're talking to federal regulators, to make it clear that this is a private business decision. And as much as, groups like Friends of the Eel River would love to take credit for really pushing PG&E to do the right thing and remove these dams, they are a business entity that's making a business-driven decision. And of course, this project is regulated by those federal regulators called the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. So there are many reasons why removal of Scott Dam has long been inevitable. This includes concerns about safety and reliability, costs of regular upgrades and maintenance, lots of ecosystem impacts. I don't have time to get into the details tonight, but the big picture is that the Potter Valley Project has failed in just about every way that it can. It no longer produces electricity and costs ratepayers about $1 million a year. It poses really serious seismic risks to downstream communities. Sediment accumulation behind Scott Dam threatens to clog the only water release from that dam. It causes a number of ecological problems, including disrupting the natural flow of sediment, accumulating methylated mercury in the reservoir, providing ideal habitat for invasive species that actually uh, compete with and predate on our native fish. And of course, it prevents native fish from accessing hundreds of miles of really excellent cold water habitat in the upper basin. The habitat has been confirmed a number of times to be about 80 miles of habitat for Chinook and just over 280 miles of habitat for steelhead. And, like I said, it also turns out to be some of the best habitat, so some of the best salmonid habitat in the entire watershed. I'm going to real quick put a link in the chat. Um, and that link takes you to a presentation of mine that gets into lots of other details. So if you're wondering what all these pictures that I'm just going to click through right now, what I am referencing with all these pictures, go and watch the presentation at that link. Another thing that I want to just briefly emphasize is that in order to fully reap the benefits of dam removal, it must happen as soon as possible. Every day that this project remains in our watershed, it causes harm to the eel's native fish and to water quality. This is a picture on the screen here of Cape Horn Dam fish ladder. Yes, there is a fish ladder at that first dam, but it is really problematic, and species listed under the Endangered Species Act are harmed all the time when they're attempting to migrate through this structure. So, like I said before, PG&E's stated reason for decommissioning and removing this project is because of the long-standing economic losses. Even when it did generate electricity, it made up for the past 20 years, it was about a quarter of 1% of PG&E's entire hydropower portfolio. So it was a really measly amount of electricity. And in fact, PG&E acknowledged that it cost about $20 for every $1 of electricity generated. So, even when it did make something, it was just really uneconomical. I think it's fair to also say that their risk assessment team is extremely wary of the risks posed by various geological or geotechnical elements, the aging infrastructure, the accumulating sediment, and even the unusual design of Scott Dam. Congressman Huffman gave us a great quote last spring at the Eel River Expo. He told us that in conversations with a dam safety engineer at PG&E, that engineer told him of all the projects he oversees, Scott Dam is the one that keeps him up at night. And I think that's really important for us to keep in mind that this project is, constantly at risk of failure. Groups like Friends of the Eel River and Cow Trout, tribes like the Round Valley Indian tribes and the many others in the region, we're of course motivated to see this project removed to stop the harms that it causes to our watershed, and of course for the hope of salmonid recovery. So again, I'm not going to go into detail tonight, but I've left these maps up on the screen here so that you can, get your hope all tingled up. These maps illustrate the potential for salmonid recovery and the extent of the really high quality habitat in the upper basin. And again, if you want to hear more about that, just check out that other presentation that is linked in the chat. I'm going to hand it over to Charlie now, who is going to talk about the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, as well as the other various processes that are underway at the moment. Take it away, Charlie.
Yeah, thanks, Alicia. Charlie Schneider with Cal Trout. I'm our connectivity program manager, and so I work on a lot of our dam removal projects across the state with many, many partners. And I guess for better or worse, I'm our FERC expert on staff. Again, FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. FERC is a federal body, regulatory body that exists to regulate power projects. That includes transmission lines, gas plants, et cetera, et cetera. Of importance here, they also regulate large hydropower facilities. And so I think a big question is why now, right? Why is PG&E making this decision now? And the answer is because these large hydropower projects typically operate on 30 to 50-year licenses from FERC. And so when a project's license expires or comes up for renewal at the end of its term, it's often a decision point where a project owner, utility, in this case PG&E, makes a decision whether to spend the money to relicense a project for another 30 to 50 years, where they get that certainty that they'll be able to operate the facilities and make a return on their investment, or if they're going to decide to get rid of the project. And in the case of the Potter Valley project, the better part of 10 years ago now, PG&E made the decision that they no longer wanted the project. Again, as Alicia mentioned, for economic reasons. And so they originally tried to sell the project. They didn't have any buyers. FERC went through what's called an orphan process. There were no takers for that. And so here we are now with decommissioning, which is the last step when the project owner and FERC can't find a licensee to take over the project. So what is a license to surrender? And that's the technical term for decommissioning. We often interchange those two terms, but the technical term is a license surrender. And it means that PG&E is giving up its license to operate these facilities as a hydropower project. And when they do that, they present a plan to the FERC, again, the federal regulators, for how they will decommission the project. That can be a whole range of things and is really project specific. Oftentimes for a project owner like PG&E, they're really seeking to limit their liability, their future liability with the project, and essentially not leave facilities out on the landscape that they'll need to maintain for public safety. This is a great big construction project essentially at this point. And so there's several processes that are happening in parallel, but also sort of combined at certain points. And so I think it's important for folks to understand what those are. This FERC process is, again, the federal side of the regulation. Typically, large projects like this are governed by Environmental Policy Act. So NEPA, in this case, the National Environmental Policy Act. And then there will also be a parallel California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA process that's run by the Water Board. And so for this comment period, we're focused on FERC, and I'll talk a little bit about what comes next. But the next step in this process will be FERC developing a NEPA document. We recently sent out, and I know Save California Salmon sent out some information on what's called the 401 scoping. That's the first step in this CEQA process, the California Environmental Review process. And so just be mindful of sort of these parallel paths that this project's on, and there'll be other environmental review associated with it, again, because it's a big project. So why comment? And I think we can look to both the CEQA and NEPA processes for that a little bit. FERC needs to understand the project. There's always a human element to these things, and we have FERC staff back in DC that are, thumbing through 2,000 pages of PG&E decommissioning plan right now, right, and trying to understand everyone's interests and aspects of this project. And so this initial 30-day public comment period that FERC has opened, I like to think of as what we call scoping. This was very similar to the 401 process that started, but it's really a time for FERC to hear from the public and interested parties, tribal nations, other stakeholders about why this project is important to them, and really to learn from those affected parties what's important here. When FERC will go through its NEPA process, there'll be another public comment period. But when FERC ultimately makes its ruling, they'll need to find that the proposed action, what PG&E is asking them to do, is in the public interest. And so it's important for them to understand what those public interests are, what folks care about as it relates to that project. In practice, when FERC makes their decision, and we know this from each decommissioning is different, or each license surrender is different rather, but we know this from other rulings, is that FERC will try to balance their decision based on project owner cost, ratepayer cost, obviously the loss of power generation, environmental concerns, public safety concerns, and then local needs. And so while the project owner has a lot of say in what they propose to FERC, FERC will need to make sure that that's reasonable, and then also FERC will condition mitigation. So, PG&E, you have to restore the reservoirs when you're done to put them back in a state that will, benefit future generations, or at least not harm future generations. So that's kind of a unique part of this process, is it at the end, FERC and in consultation with tribes and resource agencies will actually tell PG&E, you have to do these things as you pull out of this project, as you sort of put things back into some sort of state that you've proposed. And so it's really important for all folks that are interested in this to let FERC know what you think that should be. If you think they should do restoration in the reservoir footprint, tell them that. And importantly, tell them why. I care about this because FERC tends to give more weight to substantive solution-oriented input rather than emotional or purely like I'm for dam removal, I'm against dam removal comments. The for and against comments, by and large, have already been decided by PG&E. They're the project owner and they get to decide what happens here. So the sort of the big component of this, we're taking out the dams. PG&E makes that decision as the project owner. We, as interested parties and folks that want to engage in this process, are trying to steer it in a beneficial direction towards our interests by letting FERC know what we care about and asking them to tell PG&E to do X, Y, or Z that protects our interests. So what to expect over the next several years? This will be a years-long process, most likely, although I think we were all surprised that this comment period opened so quickly. FERC will take these comments, they'll consider them along with the license surrender application, and they'll begin development of their NEPA document, their environmental document. Once they have a draft of that environmental document completed, they'll open it up for a 30 to 60-day public comment period. Something you may want to ask for in your comments is a 60-day public comment period instead of a 30-day public comment to give all of us more time to review that. Public input here is important, both in the CEQA and NEPA process. And then FERC may have additional information requests. They'll do consultation with tribes and resource agencies. And eventually, once they have the information they feel they need to make a decision, they'll issue what's called a surrender order that will tell PG&E, go forth and do these things that we've now required you to do as you decommission this project. That will likely include several years of monitoring and adaptive management. And then, several years post-construction, FERC will issue what's called the final order, and that will allow PG&E to be done with their license obligations to federal regulators with the project. Once that's done, PG&E may decide to divest of the lands associated with the project, but until FERC has signed off on the order and said, you've done everything we asked you to, PG&E will need to remain responsible for the quote unquote project lands, the polygon on the map that PG&E owns and is responsible for under their license terms. So that's a really wonky, boring way of saying things. It is the regulatory process, unfortunately. But again, I just want to stress, FERC needs to hear from you because they're not experts in our region. They don't know what they should care about, and you need to tell them what they should care about. And as much as you can, provide factual backing for that. So I'm going to hand it back to Alicia, and she's going to talk you through a little bit on how to actually go through the comments process.
Thanks, Charlie. So I'll start off by saying, I'm going to just show you what the FERC website looks like, talk a little bit about what we suggest your comments should say. If you cannot follow along super closely right at this moment, don't worry. You can find all of this same information at eelriver.org, at freetheeel.org, at I'm forgetting Save California Salmon's website in the moment. But all of the organizations represented here have this same information on our websites. So if you follow any of our organizations, you'll be able to find this information as well. And as Nicole said at the top of the hour, you could also join us in person and have some dinner with us and sit down and write your comment in person with us. So to start out, if you are at any one of those websites, you're going to see a link to FERC's e-comment process. When you hit that link, it's going to take you to this website here. You're going to fill in all of your information, your name, your street address, all that good stuff. Importantly, your email address. You're going to, do this CAPTCHA code thing. And then when you click authorize, you're going to go to your own email address. FERC will send you a link. And then in that link, you will be able to, it'll take you to a site that looks, voila, like this. Oh gosh, now you all have my personal address. That was maybe not a great thing to do. Well, don't stalk me, please. But it'll take you to a page that looks like this. And then here, you're going to enter in the docket number. I'll tell you it right now, but like I said, you can find this information on our websites. It's P-77-332. P77, that's the project number for this hydropower project, for the Potter Valley project. And then every time there's a different action that they do in the FERC docket, they give it a sub docket number. So that 332, that is the sub docket number for for this license surrender commenting process. So you put that in this field here where my cursor is, and then you type in your comments. You have 1,000 characters here. I definitely recommend drafting them in a Word document or something, make sure they look all neat and tidy, and then you just submit your comments. So it is pretty straightforward. It's not quite as simple as just like clicking a single button. But you can also snail mail your comments, and that's a great way to, put a really personal touch on what you're saying to these federal regulators. And what should you say? So a couple of things that we think are really important to emphasize. As Charlie said, the proposal is to remove the dams. What we care about here as advocates for the Eel River is that dam removal happen quickly. It needs to happen quickly, not only to stop the ongoing harms that the project causes to the Eel River, but also to mitigate the safety and maintenance issues, and also to reduce costs to ratepayers. It's really unfair for ratepayers to be paying $1 million a year for something that is generating absolutely no benefit. It's also good to emphasize that PG&E is making a private business decision, and that that these dams are no longer generating electricity. FERC should know that, but it's good for them to hear. You can tell FERC that you support PG&E's proposal for rapid removal because it's the best choice to reduce harms to the Eel River fisheries and to limit the impacts of dam removal. And then this one is really important also. You can tell them that the plan is broadly supported by communities in both river basins as a compromise that resolves the longstanding tension between Eel River and Russian River. Something that I'm going to hand it back to Charlie to talk about in a minute here is the new Eel Russian facility. And that is the plans that folks in both river basins came to develop a dam-free diversion that is going to allow for continued diversions from the eel to the Russian, but in a way that doesn't harm the eel. So yeah, that's how you comment. That's a kind of a short picture of what you should say, but we really do encourage you to personalize it, make your comments individual. And Charlie, I'll pass it back over to you to talk about the NERF.
Yeah, so I think again, complicated process. What PG&E is proposing to FERC, right? Again, PG&E gets to propose their preferred method of decommissioning is a two-piece proposal. The first is that PG&E will remove both dams and do restoration. That's my sort of broad sweep summary of what they've said. The proposal at this phase lacks a lot of detail, and that comes later in the process. But there's a second portion of it, which is called the non-project use of project lands. Essentially, what the non-project use of project lands does is it asks FERC to take a portion of the project footprint out of the project license before PG&E is 100% done. I mentioned with that final surrender order, and hand it off to the Eel Russian Project Authority so they can build a new diversion at the former site of Cape Horn Dam. So the non-project use of project lands is what's in front of FERC. They only have to say, yeah, it's okay if someone else uses this property. The actual permitting of the new diversion and the building of it is a separate process that will go through a whole separate regulatory process. I'll post in the chat the link to the Eel Russian Project Authority. This is a local joint powers authority, mostly comprised of Sonoma Water and Mendocino Inland Water and Power Commission, but there's some complicating factors about who sits on the board there. Round Valley does have a seat on their board of directors, but the Eel Russian Project Authority was created for the sole purpose of designing and building this new diversion facility. And again, all that's in front of FERC here is not whether or not the diversion facility is built or how it's permitted or environmental conditions associated with it. It's just if it's okay for PG&E to let someone else use a portion of their lands before the final surrender order. And so as a commenter, take that into consideration. Note that it isn't necessarily an affirmative to build a new diversion facility, but it certainly is an important option to leave open so water users can try to seek that solution that we've all negotiated. And Caltrout, in full disclosure, Caltrout was part of those negotiations. We are in support of the new diversion facility, but we certainly recognize that people have different perspectives on that, and I'm not trying to shape your comments on that specific issue. So. I will post in the chat a link to the Eel Russian Project Authority if you'd like to learn more about that new diversion facility that's proposed. and they have a bunch of information on there. So again, just to make sure you're aware, two components of that decommissioning or the license surrender application: the decommissioning plan, which includes removal of both dams, and then the non-project use of project lands. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful and maybe uncomplicates a complicated thing. So I think now I'm going to hand it over to Regina. And Regina's the director of Save California Salmon. And Regina's going to talk to us a little bit about some Klamath experience with it, which I think is super helpful as we go through these large dam removal processes. And we've just learned a lot from Klamath. And I think it's really instructive for all of us to hear those lessons.
Well, thank you, Charlie. That was really helpful. And I do have a presentation that I'm going to share, but I just wanted to start out by saying my name is Regina Chicazola. I'm with Save California Salmon. I get to work with Nicole, which is wonderful. I have been part of the movement to undam the Klamath River now for 22 years, and we were very successful. So I would start by saying dam removal works. It's a wonderful thing to experience, and that your comments do matter. Whether or not it seems like FERC is this big federal entity that's very complicated, yeah, that's true. But they do need to hear that not only do you want these dams down, but they need to hear from you, especially local people, on how you want it to happen. And they need to hear that you need to see some local benefits out of this, as far as making sure some jobs stay local, making sure that there's recreational opportunities, that hunting and fishing is still allowed in some areas, and that ultimately, hopefully, the tribes get some of the land back. So I'm going to share my presentation and just go over our wonderful success story, and hopefully we'll be telling the same story about the Eel River in about 5 to 6 years. Okay, can we see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, that's not good.
And I just gotta say that I cannot stop smiling. I know I'm sitting here like trying not to grin, but this is so exciting and I'm just really happy about this process. Thank you guys.
Okay, can we see the screen now?
We can see the screen.
Okay, now I need to get it back to slideshow for some reason. Aha, okay, so Klamath Dam removal, what we've learned and why it matters to the Eel River. So I'm starting by showing you a video that was taken a few weeks ago of the Klamath, the salmon being back into the tributaries about the Klamath Lake, and some of the restoration. And these are the former dam sites in the area above it. So this is a short video.
Regina, can you speak up a little bit? You're a little faded out. Can't hear you, Regina.
I'm not talking right now. I was
Oh,
just
I'm so sorry. Okay.
I'm just gonna show the video, this video just real quick. Okay. So yeah, I just wanted to show a video that people are very surprised in the upper basin, but as of this point, it's been a year and a month since dam removal, and the salmon are now back into nearly every tributary above Upper Klamath Lake and every tributary within the footprints of the 4 dams. So the salmon have inhabited the upper basin and the Klamath River and are back to the Klamath River tribes, Upper Klamath tribes, that way quicker than we ever thought they would be. And I just wanted to share that video because the videos were taken by a tribal member in the upper basin about 2 weeks ago. And we are just so excited because not only did the salmon get up to the upper basin way quicker than anyone thought was possible, they were also able to get up a couple of fish ladders on some small dams where there are natural lakes that are not meant for salmon and were never meant for salmon. So it just shows like how resilient they are, and hundreds of them have been seen in the upper basin so far. So we are so excited and happy for our friends and family in the upper basin, and the fact that the Klamath tribes of Oregon now have salmon back for the first time in over 100 years. And then this is just a picture of some before and afters. This is Copco before, Copco after, and Iron Gate before and after. And even though the FERC process for us took like almost 20 years, dam removal only took about a year and drawdown, and this is 4 large dams, only took about a year and a half. It was able to happen really quickly. It was extremely successful, and the areas where the reservoirs are already like very much restored and very beautiful. And that's because of the effort that we made to make sure dam removal happened in a way that was beneficial to the community and the environment. And so this is just a picture of where we're talking about. These dams covered over 20 miles of river, but it ended up keeping over 400 miles of habitat from being able to be inhabited by the salmon. And it's not done, you know, there's lots of restoration that needs to happen, and restoration will be happening for a long time, but a river will heal itself if you let it. Oops. So in the Klamath, one thing I wanted to point out is that there were all these different agreements that had to happen to make this happen. And then there was a dam removal entity called the Klamath River Renewal Corporation that took the dams out, and that was made up of scientists and local people. And the tribes were part of that. And in this situation, it's just going to be PG&E. So I feel like it's even more important to engage in the FERC process, because whatever local benefits that happen, whatever restoration that happens, whatever water quality monitoring that happens, we have to negotiate that with PG&E. And that's a corporation. It's not made of local people. So local voices will be important. And this is just to show that it's very different types of topography and ecosystems within these areas. And, you know, truthfully, the Eel River probably has the chance to recover a little quicker as far as it not being quite as desert-like. But there are different kinds of sediments. So we'll just have to make sure, you know, there's a lot of trees replanted, vegetation replanted, and sediments are managed in a good way. And so now the good news. This is from last year. So this was within weeks of dam removal. We saw over almost 8,000 salmon repopulate the upper Klamath area. And this is the area where the reservoirs are, in between where Iron Gate was and where the Keno Reservoir is. So I forgot what it is, but that's probably more than 80 miles of river. That over 7,000 salmon were able to spawn last year. And it was more salmon. We do field trips with kids to these areas, and it was more salmon than even like kids that are tribal fishermen have ever seen in one spot. We, at one time in an hour-long field trip, we were able to see 40 to 50 salmon spawning at once, just within one small creek segment. So, you know, if you let them come back, they will. And that's the point of this slide. And then I just wanted to say one thing you will see with dam removal, and that's why it's really important that it's done in a good way and that there's comments, is that there will be short-term impacts. But what we saw in the Klamath is these impacts, instead of lasting like months like we thought they might have, really lasted often for periods of days or weeks. And the dams were removed during the winter time when there was not a lot of salmon in the river. And there were efforts made to make sure that the impacts were quick. And even when the dams were being removed, we saw better dissolved oxygen levels than we normally did with the dams in place. It was just a couple times we saw these dissolved oxygen impairments happen with large sediment going down the river. But also that sediment made a lot of good habitat for trees to grow once it was deposited in the sides of the river. And so this just shows the temperature differences. Now what we're seeing is, you know, the spring temperatures are heating up quicker, which are good for baby salmon. And then they are getting cool way faster when the fall comes. So the temperatures are much better for salmon now. And I just want to mention real quick, all this data comes from the Yurok and Karuk tribes. And that we are really lucky that we have like a 10 to 20 year data showing these really great impacts of dam removal, and that's because of the tribes. So thank you to them. And then this is just another slide that looks at the water temperature differences. And you can see now that we have the dams completely out, the differences are major. You know, like they changed a little bit without dams at first, but now we're seeing that they're just dropping so much quicker. And this was really important because you know, when we had the Klamath fish kills, those were largely due to temperature issues. That's what allowed those fish diseases to spread rampantly. And so now we're seeing cooler temperatures quicker into the fall, and the salmon are able to survive. And it's just really exciting for us. We're also seeing much less fish diseases in the springtime and better growth of salmon. And then there's just like, you can look at the river and it's dramatically cleaner. You know, this is the Iron Gate stretch of the river, the reservoir, and it was stinky. It was so disgusting with toxic algae. Sometimes it would be 5,000 times what was safe to recreate in up there. And downriver, our kids would not get in the river. And to keep a kid out of the river, it's got to be pretty gross, as you can imagine. And now our kids are swimming in the river and feel comfortable in it. When we go rafting, we can see the difference. Even people who are huge doubters in the recreational industry are just shocked and constantly asking us about why and how the river has gotten so much cleaner, so much quicker. And as you can see, there's tons of native plants that are also blooming where the reservoirs used to be. And that's due to the restoration effort that happened. So, you know, making sure there's a good replanting effort, that that helps with capturing sediment, but also it's just really beautiful to see the recovery that can happen. And then this to me is the most exciting, as someone who recreates in the river a lot and has been afraid to during hot times. We used to have, like, look at this, 43% of the time during the summer and fall, we would have it. So it was too scary to get into the area below the reservoirs. And now we're having very low levels of toxic algae blooms or harmful algae blooms, just a small percentage of the time. And then 83 of the times there's not even detection happening. And this is less than 2 years after dam removal that these numbers are, or actually these were last year's numbers. So this year will probably even be better. So this is directly after dam removal, when there was still sediment in the river, that we were getting such good water quality. Yeah, and then the exciting news is we are done now with the restoration of the tributaries. So, you know, there is issues that need to happen. You know, the creeks were really incised where the tributaries came in after dam removal from being underwater so long. And there was a lot of restoration that had to happen. Big, large woody debris had to be put in place. But now it is finished. Not all of the restoration, but the actual tributary restoration is finished, and salmon are able to get way further up the tributaries now than they were before. And so, yeah, and then we are now rafting through where the reservoirs used to be with kids, and it's just so amazingly beautiful. And this picture up here is salmon in the way upper basin taken by tribal members. Yeah, and the Klamath tribes are celebrating and just so happy, and elders are getting out in the water and seeing the salmon back. So it's just such an amazing story to be able to share with you all. Yeah, and so this is just a map of the upper basin and all the places that they had found salmon. This was like 3-4 weeks ago. They're now into a lot of this red area too. So the Klamath is a pretty big basin. But yeah, salmon are just going anywhere they can get to, into a lot of places we didn't think they could. Yeah, and so now the kids are getting back out there, they're celebrating. And I have like 1 or 2 more slides, but I kind of wanted to end it with saying, you know, it's important that we get involved with dam removal, not just so we see these water quality impacts, but, you know, so that we can make sure that there's a good monitoring plan, that we can, because we were lucky enough in the Klamath that we had the dam removal entity KRC, and we had the tribes doing all this monitoring, but that costs some money. And we just need to make sure that PG&E commits to doing this restoration and to doing this monitoring, because we want to tell the success story of the Eel River too. And then also it's important, you know, to ask for local benefits, to ask for some of these jobs to stay local. There has been millions of dollars invested in Klamath Dam removal, and luckily a lot of Yurok tribal members are out there on the ground, and they are, you know, the ones that are planting seeds and planting trees. But Siskiyou County, where I lived for a long time, now I'm down in Humboldt, missed out on a lot of the benefits of dam removal. And there's a lot of people who can fall trees, drive cats, and, you know, it's a lot of the jobs are like the old logging jobs, you know, the things that the people used to do in the logging industry as far as what goes into restoration. You know, lots of heavy equipment operators, water tenders, things of that nature. And if you comment and you get involved, you can make sure those jobs stay local, and that there's a big restoration effort. So it's just one of the things I want to mention, you know, like how dam removal happens. The devil is in the details, and the details are what helps rebuild our communities and our economies along the way. Yeah, and so now we're back on the river. You know, we did the salmon run where we went up this year, and then Rios to Rivers, and the tribes all came back down and were the first ones to kayak the undammed Klamath River. And there is so much people that want to come and raft the Klamath River now, or camp on the Klamath River, so much so we don't have anywhere near enough campsites or facilities to begin to supply the people who want to be here. And the same was true with the restoration crews. So I think it's just good to prepare, you know, to build up your resources and economy, because a lot of money comes in with dam removal and a lot of opportunities. And so that's it for my slideshow. And I also wanted to say that, you know, as Alicia said, and hopefully we can put a slide back up, it's hard, it's kind of frustrating dealing with the FERC website, but it's not that bad. You just have to register and know the number, and then you can get your comments in. But we will be having a dinner at some food and a workshop with Alicia on Friday in Eureka at Synapsis. And then Charlie is having a workshop that I think probably Nicole will be at too, down in Ukiah. And that's on next Tuesday. And then we'll be down at the Mateel Community Center with Good Shield from Seventh Generation Rise playing music. And we will also have kid activities, and that will be down in Redway on the 21st. So there's so many opportunities to get involved. I wouldn't be surprised if even more happen. And this video will be on our on Save California Salmon and probably everyone else's YouTube channels within the next few days. So if you didn't get those directions on how to get your comments in, this video will be widely distributed. And that's all I had.
And before we take questions from folks in the audience, I just wanted to share something, some really exciting news that just broke, which is that the Yurok tribe has actually been working with the Round Valley tribes for quite a while now, to share knowledge and experience and what they learned in the dam removal process. And they just announced that they have signed a treaty of friendship in advance of Eel River Dam removal. And you know, I just think it's so encouraging and wonderful to see these two nations working together to share the vast knowledge that the Yurok tribe has accumulated, and make sure that the Round Valley tribes are able to you know, be in a position to truly lead the restoration effort that's going to follow dam removal. So kudos to them, and I'm just so glad to have such like incredible leadership as a part of this process.
Great. And so if anyone has any questions, please put them in either the question and answer is easier to see, or put them in the chat. And we'll also try to check Facebook to see if there's questions there. But we're happy to answer any questions we can.
So our first question is from Will. Says, any chance of depriving the susceptible water thieves from continuing to take from the fish?
I'll go ahead and start
I was
that
gonna
off,
say,
and
do
I
you
think
want-
Charlie, you probably have something else to say about it.
I was
But
gonna say, send it to Charlie. No, I'm just
yeah,
kidding.
well, so
Go for it.
the first thing to say is just that this process before FERC really has nothing to do with the diversion. You know, like Charlie said, it does carve out the option for some other entity to do something with this piece of property, which is the diversion tunnel and some of that infrastructure surrounding the diversion tunnel. Um, but it doesn't get to the question of how much water or when or who's responsible for managing that or overseeing that, who's going to build the infrastructure. Um, so what you're really interested in, I think, Will, if that was the name of our commenter, is the details in the water diversion agreement, and you can find that document linked on our website, eelriver.org, probably lots of other places, but you know, essentially there was an agreement that was reached that outlines a lot of parameters of like how much water can be diverted at what season. It's all based on ensuring that the eel has enough to provide for its own needs. But the diversion agreement also includes some requirements for water users in the Russian River to start developing self-sustainability within their own watershed. And there's going to be a review, I think, after 20 or 30 years, which sounds like a long time, I know. But there's going to be a review of this agreement, and the parties who are signatories to it are all going to come together and say, you know, is this working? Is the Russian River actually taking steps to, you know, enhance their own water supply so they don't need to rely on the eel any longer? Charlie, what do you want to add to that?
I mean, I think you did a great job. I mean, a big part of why Caltrout is part of that water diversion agreement, and you know, we support it in large part because it paves the way for dam removal, and you know, people need water to drink and to use. I think we all have different values associated with how that water gets used. But at Caltrout, we like to be pragmatic about that. And we think that, you know, many of the facts of the case with this diversion facility in the Eel River and the location, we can do a diversion in a way that won't have a significant negative impact on the ecosystem. And that's by diverting water in the wet season when there's a lot of it. Um, there's a lot of detail there, but I would just go back to, you know, the starting point of what Alicia said, sort of what's in front of us now. It's really just, you know, FERC will assess. FERC does not deal in water rights, really importantly in this process, and um, that fact gets conflated really often in the media, and it's really important to understand FERC does not deal with water rights. And so all that's being asked here is the permission to use lands, the water rights, the permitting for the new diversion facility, all that stuff happens in a separate process outside of it. And I think it's really important for FERC to not get wrapped around the spokes dealing with things that are outside of its authority. So um, certainly dig into that. I would again point you to the Eel Russian Project Authority website. Those are the folks that will be building the version. There's a lot of info there about the type of structure, the flow rules, etc., the detail. But for this process and for the comments to FERC, um, just be careful not to conflate two separate processes because remember that human element. FERC staff will get confused as well, and we want to make sure that we keep dam removal on track.
And if I could just add one other thing too, I think one really important element of the water diversion agreement. So Friends of the Eel River is not a part of that agreement, and we would prefer to see the diversion ended entirely. Period. You know, that's where we stand. But we haven't objected to this agreement largely because it commits the people who used to oppose dam removal to now support it. And it's pretty important that we can go to FERC with a united front, if you will, and show this federal agency that this proposal is broadly supported, even by people who maybe didn't support it a couple years ago. And that's a really important element of this agreement is that we're, you know, all kind of compromising a little bit. But we're bringing along all the people who would fight this process tooth and nail and make sure that they don't fight it. And you know, as I said before, really to reap the benefits of dam removal for the Eel River, it needs to happen quickly.
I can tackle the next one. Richard asks if FERC's operating any differently under the current administration. We haven't seen any evidence of that, other than perhaps that they're operating more quickly than they usually do. I think we are all we have sort of a limited sample of information to go off of. But I do think some of the current administration's initiatives to speed up permitting of energy projects may actually benefit the pace at which this project goes, even though it's a decommissioning project. So hard to say. There are 2 new FERC commissioners, and I think importantly, FERC was not closed during the government shutdown either, which is why we have this comment period, even though the government's been shut down. So I would say we really haven't seen any evidence. FERC as a commission tends to be pretty immune to political pressure. We'll often see congressional representatives, senators, et cetera, filing comments on the docket. FERC treats them like anyone else. They really are a very industry-friendly commission. And because of that, tend to sort of stay in their lane, regardless of who's in office in the federal administration.
So the next question I see on there, it looks like is about inflows from the upper basin and concern that in dry summers the water could cease entirely. So the Round Valley Indian Tribes employs a contractor who has worked really hard to measure inflows to Lake Pillsbury and look at like how is the temperature changing from the upper basin water to what's coming out of the bottom of Scott Dam. And as I understand it, we're not really concerned about the river going entirely dry. But I will add that that doesn't mean it hasn't happened. In fact, just in the last decade or 11 years, the river has flowed subsurface, like gone completely dry near the mouth of the river, right by Fortuna. And, was that because the dams weren't in place? No, clearly they're still in place right now. So I think there's a variety, when you're looking at a system as large as the Eel, there's a variety of things that we need to consider. Water users all doing their part to curtail use during dry times, making sure that we are allowing the natural systems and the sponges to, really operate as as nature intends them to. And yeah, so what we do expect to see is that following dam removal, that the high flows will be a little higher and that low flows will be a little lower, but we're not expecting that it's going to be a typical thing for the river to run dry in the summer.
Yeah, and especially because the diversion will be cut off at a certain, most likely the proposal is the diversion will get cut off at a certain point when flows get too low, which is not the case right now. Right now, diversions still happen during low flows.
That's right. Yeah.
So I think that's actually the end of our time. And I just wanted to thank everyone that came today, and to remind people to go to Friends of the Eel River to get if you need to figure out if you don't remember how to do your comments. And also there will be an event on Friday at Synapsis if people want to come out and learn more. And at the Mateel next week on Friday and down in Ukiah next Tuesday. And also there'll be a listening session for our youth work for Save California Salmon in Hoopa tomorrow at the high school and in Orleans next week at the elementary school. And so we just want to hear from Save California Salmon is looking to hear from people on our youth activities and what we need to be doing to better support our youth and families. So please get involved and please follow all of our groups on socials so that you can find out when the next comment period happens. And with that, I wanted to thank everyone so much. And if anyone else has any closing remarks, then please feel free to say them. But if there's additional questions that we didn't get to, hopefully you can ask them at one of the other upcoming events.
I'd just love to say thank you to everyone who's here, who's listening, who's watching this after the fact. Together, we are going to free the eel, and it's going to be magnificent.
Free the eel. I just wanted to close out and say, to express again, reiterate how important it is that we stand up for our cultural resources, tribal beneficial uses, and really make our voices heard in support of this decommissioning process, and speak up and speak out and free the ill. Thank you. Kari Wadem Walkwell.